Despite all their insane experience in processor development, Intel just couldn't crack the mobile market. Remember the Asus Zenfone, Lenovo P90, or Mi Pad 2? Those actually ran on Intel chips. But these days, Intel's not making smartphone processors at all. Nvidia tried too. They jumped into mobile with their own chips, made some noise in the tablet market, but now their Tegra chips are only found in Nintendo Switch, Nvidia Shield, and a recently released Switch 2. Xiaomi had all the chances in the world to make it big, but their experiments with mobile silicon honestly just left people scratching their heads. And remember when everyone was saying Google would drop the new Pixel in 2021 with their own custom chip? All the experts swore it would be a disaster. After all, nobody ever managed to compete with Qualcomm. So why would Google be any different? But surprise, Google pulled off the impossible. With their new Tensor chips, the Pixel lineup managed to carve its own solid niche. Still, Qualcomm remained the main supplier for everyone who isn't Apple, Google, or Huawei. Even a giant like AMD, yeah, the company cranking out server, desktop, and laptop chips for years, doesn't even touch smartphone processors. So what's actually going on here? How did Qualcomm end up raking in billions from processors without even owning a single factory? Why can't powerhouses like IBM, Intel, AMD, or Nvidia even come close to knocking them off the top spot? And seriously, how did Qualcomm trick the whole world? Right now, there are 5 major chip manufacturers: Samsung, HiSilicon owned by Huawei, Apple, MediaTek, and Qualcomm. Samsung, Apple, and Huawei only make processors for their own devices, so in the open market there are really just 2 giants, Snapdragon and MTK. But MediaTek still can't compete with Snapdragon chips in the flagship segment. Buyers turn up their noses at MTK devices and usually go for the competition. Sure, MediaTek has skyrocketed to the top in sales volume recently, especially in the budget and mid-range segments. And with the Dimensity 9400, they've almost caught up to flagship Snapdragons, but brands and developers still fully don't trust them. Serious software and camera makers always optimize for Snapdragon because that's the standard. So even new flagship devices on MediaTek often get crippled camera or AI features simply because the ecosystem is built around Qualcomm. So Qualcomm effectively controls not just the hardware market but the software and infrastructure as well. Let's take a look at sales figures from recent years. According to Strategy Analytics in 2017, Qualcomm powered 42% of all Android devices. In 2018, they had 45% of the market, and in 2019 and 2020, 40%. Apple comes in second, with about 20% of the global processor market, and Samsung holds third place with 15%. By 2024, the picture had shifted a bit. Qualcomm's share in Android devices dropped to 35%, but the company still dominates the flagship segment. Apple holds a steady 20 to 22% of the global market, and MediaTek has strengthened its position in the mid-range and budget segments, even surpassing Samsung in mobile chip shipments. As of 2025, the Android flagship market is completely dominated by Qualcomm. No mass-market super flagship besides the Pixel and Chinese Huawei devices use a MediaTek chip, even when the performance is on par. That's because Qualcomm doesn't just sell chips, they provide the whole infrastructure. Drivers, SDKs, AI services, camera systems, security, updates. If you don't want trouble, you get Snapdragon. Let's break this down, starting of course with money. Qualcomm is no good guy corporation. If you take a dozen rats and put them in a cage without food for long enough, they'll start eating each other until only the boldest, most ruthless cannibal remains, the so-called Rat King. That's exactly how you describe Qualcomm's behavior on the market. They're extremely aggressive with competitors. Here's a simple, clear example. Apple's iPhones, when sold internationally, support all network standards so they'll work everywhere, and only Qualcomm holds the necessary patents for this. Qualcomm supplies the modems for iPhones and forces Apple to pay inflated prices. And if Apple refuses or sues, Qualcomm blocks them from using networks and won't sell them modems at all. Apple tried turning to Intel for some modems, but Qualcomm said pay us royalties for every smartphone sold regardless of whose modem you use. Naturally, Apple was stunned by this arrogance, but switching entirely to their own modems would take years. Plus, Qualcomm uses illegal patent practices that let them stay a monopoly in the modem chip market. In 2016, South Korea's antitrust committee fined Qualcomm $853 million for forcing clients into patent licensing deals, even for patents Qualcomm didn't actually own. They've been suffocating the market, stifling competitors' growth and squeezing partners so hard not just any vendor can compete. Qualcomm is a ruthless monopolist, and that's a legal fact. In 2019, a US court ruled that Qualcomm's aggressive licensing tactics violate antitrust laws, but Qualcomm doesn't care. As long as their profit outweighs the fines, they'll keep playing by their own rules. In the end, Apple partially mastered their own modems, but even by 2025 they haven't fully dropped Qualcomm solutions, especially in iPhones for certain markets. Qualcomm turned its patent portfolio into a superweapon. Even today, in many countries, you can't launch 5G or even 4G without their licenses. And any attempt to build an alternative leads to lawsuits, fines, and zero technical support, scaring manufacturers away. Back in 2010, when BlackBerry was at its peak, the company also faced Qualcomm's stranglehold and nearly lost 30% of the global market. The thing is, Qualcomm was the only supplier making modems with support for the CDMA network standard, which was common in Japan, North America, China, and other countries. BlackBerry had to buy these chips at inflated prices just to have network coverage in those regions. Qualcomm bled the mobile industry like this for nearly 20 years. It all ended in a huge scandal, but the court cases dragged on for years and partners lost millions during that time. Today, the same scheme applies to 5G. And even the just announced 6G networks, Qualcomm was first to announce the patent key in new generation communications tech. So any company trying to make its own modem instantly gets caught in a patent trap. There are tons of examples of shady behavior towards competitors, partners, and consumers. But to be fair, Qualcomm also makes really good processors. When you have that much money, you can hire the best talent, and that's a key factor in their success. Qualcomm is based in the US, the world's training ground for top scientific talent. The brand spends colossal sums on research. Their labs are state-of-the-art and their capabilities are virtually limitless. By 2025, their R&D budgets match the military budgets of entire countries. And they recruit not just from universities. Qualcomm poaches top engineers from competitors and even buys out AI and neural network startups, even if they're only developing something potentially interesting for mobile devices. Their secret? Unlike most manufacturers, Qualcomm takes a comprehensive approach to chip design and delivers ready-made solutions for everything. For example, if a manufacturer picks MTK, they get a system on chip with off-shelf ARM cores, unmodified bought under license, a modem supporting just the 3 to 4 most popular brands, and a Mali GPU, which always has fewer graphics cores than Qualcomm's Adreno. If you just need to make a cheap smartphone, sure, that's enough, but you can't build a real flagship on such a processor. Want top-notch sound? You'll have to buy a separate audio chip, wire it onto the board, and teach the firmware to support it. Want advanced neural network algorithms? Tough luck. MediaTek is full of compromises like this, while Snapdragon gives you everything at once. No need for separate audio chips. Their Hexagon DSPs handle it all. Qualcomm even sells these DSP chips separately to audio system makers as Class D amplifiers. Dear audiophile, when you buy a top-tier audio system for thousands of dollars, you're basically getting the same sound as my phone. Qualcomm has the best DSPs and DRAM. All those tensor and scalar accelerators are well documented in their SDKs, making software for neural computations a breeze, second only to Apple. Qualcomm's power delivery is excellent. They have the best GPU in the Android world, and their ISPs for image processing are killer. It's objectively incredibly difficult to compete with a product like this, because years of focused development pay off. Qualcomm could spend a year or two without innovating and still stay ahead of Samsung, MTK, and even Huawei's Kirin. Kirin can rival Qualcomm in many areas, but it's exclusive to Huawei, who aren't doing so well right now. So until sanctions are lifted, Kirin can't match Qualcomm. In 2025, Huawei really did try to make a comeback. The Kirin 9000S works without American tech and performs well, but the smartphone market outside China is still closed to them. And most top developers still optimize services and apps for Snapdragon. Even Samsung, for several years in a row now, has used Snapdragon in the European Galaxy S models, even though they used to stick to Exynos. That says everything about the market's dependence on a single brand. Qualcomm isn't just selling chips, they're pushing a whole infrastructure. Cameras, sound, AI. At every flagship launch, you see the powered by Snapdragon logo. To the consumer, all these phones seem different, but in reality, the whole market runs on one platform. Who could really compete with them? Maybe AMD, but why haven't they ever made their own smartphone processor? You might not believe it, but it's for the exact same reasons. Qualcomm is a serious competitor, and they've got AMD beat in tech, finances, and especially patents. AMD definitely has ambition, but as of 2025, we still haven't seen any single smartphone powered by AMD, even though their ARM-based chips for Windows laptops are finally starting to get some traction. In 2025, AMD did unveil their next-gen mobile chips for Ultrabooks, but they never dropped a direct Snapdragon rival for smartphones. No OEM wants to take that risk. Even Lenovo, a big AMD fan on desktops, sticks with Qualcomm and MediaTek for its phones. And then, after the news broke that Nvidia was buying ARM, a lot of people thought, okay, this is it, Nvidia's finally coming back to the mobile market and about to release a smartphone on their own chip. Well, about that. Nvidia ended up not buying ARM after all. The deal got blocked by regulators in 2022. ARM stayed independent and even went public in 2023. Nvidia's main plan was to use that architecture in their graphics cards anyway. Maybe they'll put out another game for the Nintendo Switch too. Rumors about that have been swirling for years, but for now they've got zero ambition to make a smartphone processor. Plus, they've never actually made an SoC for phones. Tegra chips are huge, meant for consoles and tablets. A beast like that doesn't fit in a phone. And with unresolved memory bandwidth issues dragging down real-world performance, Tegra never went mainstream. ARM, for its part, despite the IPO, is still just an architecture supplier, not a finished chip maker. So the smartphone market is still living in Qualcomm's ecosystem, even if the architecture itself is technically open. And last but not least, one of the biggest factors behind Qualcomm's success is, of course, marketing. For starters, they sponsor a ton of industry events, Tech Summit, MWC, you name it. If there's a big show, Qualcomm's name is all over it. That's a huge boost for their brand. On top of that, their marketing team is on point. They run slick campaigns, hire top-notch talent for visual effects. Just look, here's what a Snapdragon ad looks like. And here's a MediaTek ad. These days, Qualcomm is pumping money not just into traditional ads, but into shaping their image among developers, tech bloggers, and influencers, getting involved in educational tech initiatives. By 2025, this isn't just advertising. It's full-on brand positioning in the culture. A real smartphone runs on the Snapdragon, even if a phone has a Google Tensor or Kirin inside. Other brands have to compare themselves to Snapdragon, not the other way around. So in the end, that's how Qualcomm outsmarted everyone. The company collects royalties from almost every mobile device sold worldwide. Nearly 60% of the price of any smartphone processor is actually royalties going to Qualcomm. And they're basically untouchable for competitors and have minimized their financial risks, because they still don't own any factories. Seriously, they're the only top chip designer in the world that outsources everything to TSMC. Fire, flood, war, Qualcomm doesn't care, because they have nothing to lose. Their only job is to keep up with demand and rake in the cash. Since 2023, some new Snapdragons have been made using the 3nm process not just at TSMC, but also at Samsung Foundry, which helps reduce any supply risks. Qualcomm has managed to build such a cartel around innovation, licensing, and tech platforms that now any wireless standard, any new flagship, any new camera AI feature, you name it, it's all powered by Snapdragon. Even if an Android phone looks totally unique on the outside, under the hood, it's still controlled by one company. That's how Qualcomm tricked the world. Not because they make the absolute best hardware, but because they turn the entire market into their own private club.